The divorce papers were still lying on the kitchen table when the city woke up to the biggest financial announcement in decades. By sunrise, every news channel carried the same headline flashing in red across giant television screens in cafes, airports, and office buildings. Unknown investor Marcus Hale revealed as majority owner of Hartwell Technologies, net worth estimated at $4.8 billion, and in a tiny rented apartment across town. The woman who had left him less than 12 hours earlier dropped her coffee mug so hard it shattered across the floor. Because the man she called a failure the night before had just become the richest man in the city. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel if you believe kindness matters more than money, and that real love deserves second chances. Stories like this remind us that life can change overnight. Marcus Hale had spent most of his adult life looking invisible. At 38, he wore the same faded jackets for years, drove a rusty pickup truck that coughed smoke every winter morning, and worked endless hours doing repair contracts for small businesses across the city. People passed him every day without noticing him. He was the kind of man who quietly fixed broken things while carrying broken pieces inside himself. But what nobody knew was that Marcus had once been brilliant. Years earlier, he had worked as a software engineer for a small tech startup with a handful of dreamers working out of a warehouse. He had invested everything he had into the company before it nearly collapsed during an economic crisis. Everyone around him called him stupid for staying loyal. Investors fled. Employees quit. Even his own father told him he was wasting his life chasing fantasies. Still, Marcus stayed. Not because he believed he would become rich someday, but because he believed in building something meaningful. When the company failed publicly, Marcus lost almost everything. He sold his car, emptied his savings, and took side jobs just to survive. The only thing he never sold was a forgotten contract sitting inside an old storage folder. It gave him a tiny ownership percentage in the company if it ever recovered. At the time, the shares seemed worthless. Even lawyers laughed at him for keeping the papers. Then came Elena. Elena Brooks entered his life like sunlight through broken windows. She was beautiful, ambitious, sharp-minded, and full of restless energy. Marcus met her in a bookstore cafe during one rainy evening when she accidentally spilled tea over his notebook full of repair calculations. She apologized so sincerely that he laughed instead of getting angry, and for the first time in years, someone looked at him as if he mattered. They fell in love slowly. Marcus loved the way Elena dreamed out loud about traveling the world, owning a penthouse apartment, and building a glamorous future. He listened to her for hours, smiling quietly while imagining himself giving her everything she deserved someday. Elena loved how safe Marcus felt. He was calm in a world full of noise. He remembered little things. He carried groceries without being asked. He stayed awake beside her when she had nightmares about failing in life. For a while, love was enough. But the city they lived in worshipped success like religion. Everywhere Elena looked, she saw couples living luxurious lives online. Friends married wealthy entrepreneurs. Social media flooded her mind with designer vacations, expensive dinners, sparkling engagement rings, and giant homes overlooking the skyline. Slowly, comparison poisoned her heart. At first, the arguments were small. Marcus worked too much. Marcus never bought expensive gifts. Marcus always talked about someday. Marcus repaired old furniture instead of replacing it. Marcus said money mattered less than peace. Then the resentment deepened. Elena began hiding her embarrassment around friends. She hated arriving at parties in Marcus's old truck while everyone else stepped out of luxury cars. She stopped posting pictures with him online. She started staying later at work, surrounding herself with successful people in tailored suits who spoke about investments and million-dollar opportunities. Marcus noticed the distance growing between them, but he never fought back. He only tried harder. He picked up extra contracts. He skipped meals sometimes so Elena could enjoy dinners at restaurants she liked. He stayed awake until dawn fixing electrical systems in empty office buildings just to pay overdue bills. But exhaustion cannot compete with pride. One cold winter evening, Elena finally exploded. She looked around their tiny apartment with tears in her eyes. and asked him how long she was supposed to keep struggling beside a man who never seemed to move forward. She told him love was not enough anymore. She said she was tired of surviving when everyone else around her was living. Marcus stood there silently while she packed her bags. The hardest part was not her anger. It was the look in her eyes when she said she regretted wasting the best years of her life waiting for him to become someone important. Those words cut deeper than anything Marcus had ever heard. After she left, the apartment felt painfully quiet. Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table until sunrise, staring at the divorce papers she had signed before walking out forever. Outside the window, snow drifted softly through the empty streets while the city slept. Then his phone rang. At first, he ignored it. The number kept calling. Finally, exhausted and numb, Marcus answered. Within minutes, his entire world changed. The startup everyone thought had died years earlier had secretly become one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in the world after a massive acquisition by an international corporation. Hidden legal records revealed that Marcus still owned a substantial percentage of the company through the forgotten contract he had refused to throw away. Overnight, his shares became worth billions. By morning, reporters surrounded his apartment building. Financial analysts called him the greatest silent millionaire story in modern history. News helicopters circled overhead. Strangers suddenly wanted interviews, partnerships, photographs, and business deals. The same city that ignored Marcus yesterday now treated him like royalty. But inside that apartment, surrounded by flashing cameras outside the windows, Marcus did not feel victorious. He only felt empty. Because the one person he wanted to share the moment with had already walked away. Across town, Elena watched the news in disbelief. At first, she thought it was fake. Then she saw Marcus stepping out of the apartment building wearing the same old dark jacket, looking overwhelmed while reporters shouted questions at him. The cameras zoomed in on his tired eyes, his humble posture, the confusion written across his face. And suddenly, Elena felt something far heavier than regret: shame. Not because Marcus had become rich, but because she realized he had always been valuable before the money arrived. For days, the city obsessed over Marcus Hale. Articles described him as a mysterious billionaire who lived like an ordinary worker. People admired his humility. Old coworkers told stories about how he quietly helped employees pay rent during hard times. Repair shop owners talked about how Marcus often charged struggling customers almost nothing. The more Elena watched those stories, the more she realized how blind she had become. She remembered the nights Marcus massaged her shoulders after her stressful work days, even when his own hands were bleeding from labor. She remembered how he once walked 3 miles in heavy rain because he spent his last money buying medicine for her when she was sick. She remembered the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in the world, and she had traded all of it for status. Meanwhile, Marcus disappeared from public attention almost immediately after receiving his fortune. Instead of buying mansions or luxury cars, he paid off debts for his struggling coworkers. He donated millions anonymously to shelters, schools, and hospitals. He reopened the old repair businesses that were shutting down across the city. One evening, an elderly journalist finally asked him during an interview why he still lived so simply despite being wealthier than almost anyone in the state. Marcus smiled sadly before answering that poverty teaches people the true value of things. When you have nothing, you learn who stays, who leaves, and what love really means. That interview spread everywhere online. Elena watched it alone in her apartment while tears rolled silently down her face. Weeks passed before she finally gathered the courage to see him again. It happened on a rainy afternoon outside a community center Marcus had recently funded for struggling families. Children laughed inside the building, while volunteers carried boxes of food through the entrance. Marcus stood near the doorway wearing rolled-up sleeves, helping unload supplies from trucks himself despite the rain soaking his clothes. For a moment, Elena simply watched him from across the street. Even with billions in the bank, he looked exactly the same, not because he lacked money, but because kindness had always been his true wealth. When Marcus finally noticed her standing there, time seemed to stop between them. The rain fell harder. Cars hissed across wet pavement. Neither of them moved immediately. Elena walked toward him slowly with trembling hands and tearful eyes, carrying years of regret heavier than anything she had ever known. She tried speaking, but emotion trapped the words in her throat. Marcus looked at her quietly, not angrily, not bitterly, just tired. Elena apologized through tears for abandoning him when life became difficult. She admitted she had confused success with worth and comfort with love. She told him becoming rich had not changed who he was, it had only exposed who she had become. Marcus listened silently while rainwater dripped from his hair. Then he said something that broke her completely. He told her he never hated her for leaving because sometimes people only realize the value of a heart after they lose it. But he also admitted that pain changes people forever. Elena cried harder than she ever had in her life because she understood what he meant. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars that never disappear completely. Still, Marcus invited her inside the community center to get warm, and in that moment, something beautiful happened. Not a dramatic reunion, not instant forgiveness, just two broken human beings sitting quietly beside each other while children laughed nearby and rain tapped gently against the windows. For the first time in years, Elena saw the life she had almost destroyed chasing appearances. A peaceful life, a meaningful life, a real one. Marcus eventually used his fortune to create programs helping working-class families escape debt and homelessness. He funded scholarships for students nobody else believed in because he remembered what it felt like to be overlooked. People across the city admired him not because he became rich, but because wealth never changed his soul. And Elena spent the next years rebuilding herself from the inside out. She volunteered at Marcus's foundations, helped struggling women rebuild their lives, and slowly learned that true success is measured by how you treat people when they have nothing left to offer you. Some people said Marcus should never have allowed her back into his life. Others believed love deserved another chance. But the truth was more complicated, because life is not about perfect endings. It is about growth. It is about realizing too late what truly mattered and finding the courage to become better because of that pain. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. Before we finish this story, comment below. If you were Marcus, could you forgive someone who left you when you were struggling? If this story touched your heart even a little, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Years later, people still remembered the headline announcing Marcus Hale as the richest man in the city. But those who truly knew him remembered something far more important. He was already rich long before the money arrived. Because a loyal heart, a kind soul, and the strength to keep loving through hardship are treasures no amount of wealth can ever buy. Elena could not sleep after seeing Marcus again. The rain-soaked meeting outside the community center replayed in her mind, every night like a punishment she deserved. She remembered the exhaustion in his eyes, the calmness in his voice, and the strange sadness behind his smile. He had become one of the most powerful men in the city, yet somehow he still looked like the lonely man sitting at that kitchen table the night she left him. And that realization hurt more than anything, because money had changed his life, but betrayal had changed his heart. Weeks turned into months, and the city continued worshiping Marcus Hale like a legend. Magazine covers called him the billionaire with a worker's soul. Television hosts praised his humility. Politicians invited him to elite events. Business leaders begged for meetings with him. Luxury brands offered partnerships worth millions. Marcus refused almost all of them. Instead, he spent most of his days visiting neighborhoods people with power usually ignored. He renovated abandoned schools. He reopened small repair shops that large corporations had destroyed. He quietly paid hospital bills for families drowning in debt. Sometimes reporters caught him carrying boxes into homeless shelters late at night, wearing simple jeans and work boots, while bodyguards waited awkwardly nearby. The richer Marcus became, the more ordinary he tried to remain, and strangely, that made the world admire him even more. But while Marcus was becoming a symbol of hope for thousands of strangers, his personal life remained painfully empty. At night, after meetings and charity projects ended, he often returned alone to a quiet penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, but silence filled every corner. There were no shared dinners, no laughter, no soft conversations before sleep. Success had finally arrived, but it had arrived late. One winter evening, Marcus stood near the giant glass windows of his office watching snow fall over the streets below, when his assistant entered quietly with troubling news. An investigative journalist planned to publish private details about Elena and their divorce. Several media outlets had discovered she left Marcus the day before he became rich, and the internet was preparing to turn her into the villain of the year. Marcus immediately shut the story down. Not because he still loved her blindly, but because pain should never become public entertainment. When Elena learned what he had done, she cried alone in her car for nearly an hour. Even after everything, Marcus had protected her from humiliation. That kindness destroyed the last walls around her heart. For the first time in years, Elena stopped blaming the world for her unhappiness. She began seeing herself honestly. She realized greed had not entered her life all at once. It had happened slowly, through comparison, insecurity, pride, and fear. She had spent so long chasing the appearance of success that she stopped recognizing genuine love when it stood directly in front of her. So she changed, not dramatically overnight, but quietly. She left the luxury marketing firm, where image mattered more than people. She stopped attending shallow networking parties filled with fake smiles and expensive lies. She began volunteering full-time at Marcus's community programs without asking for attention or forgiveness. At first, many people judged her. Some volunteers whispered about her behind her back. Online commenters called her a gold digger trying to return after Marcus became rich. Others mocked her constantly. Elena accepted all of it silently. Because deep down, she believed she deserved worse. One afternoon at the community center, Elena met a struggling single mother named Rosa, whose electricity had been shut off during winter. Rosa broke down crying while explaining how embarrassed she felt needing help. Without hesitation, Elena sat beside her for hours, helping her complete paperwork, arranging emergency support, and comforting her children with hot meals. As Elena hugged the little girl goodbye, something shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she felt useful, not admired, not glamorous, just human. And somewhere nearby, Marcus quietly witnessed the entire moment. Over time, he began noticing small changes in Elena. She no longer wore expensive designer clothes trying to impress everyone around her. She listened more than she spoke. She treated janitors, volunteers, and waiters with genuine warmth. She stayed late after events helping clean floors and organize supplies without cameras around. She was becoming someone different, someone real, but Marcus remained cautious. Because once you experience abandonment during your darkest moment, trust becomes fragile forever. Then tragedy struck unexpectedly. One icy evening, Marcus received a phone call that his younger brother Daniel had been seriously injured in a highway accident outside the city. Marcus rushed to the hospital through heavy snowstorms, panic crushing his chest. Daniel had always been the only family member who believed in him even when everyone else mocked his failures. The surgery lasted all night. Marcus sat alone in the waiting room for hours staring blankly at vending machines and empty coffee cups while fear consumed him. Billionaires surrounded by power are still helpless when the people they love are suffering. Around midnight, footsteps approached quietly. Elena appeared carrying coffee and a blanket. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. She had driven nearly 3 hours through dangerous weather after hearing the news from a volunteer coordinator. Without speaking much, she simply sat beside him through the night. Hour after hour, no cameras, no attention, no hidden agenda, just presence. And for the first time since their divorce, Marcus allowed himself to lean emotionally on someone again. When the surgeon finally announced Daniel would survive, Marcus broke down completely. The pressure, loneliness, exhaustion, and years of buried pain crashed over him all at once. Elena held him while he cried in the middle of that cold hospital hallway, and neither of them cared who saw. Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with simply staying when things become difficult. Daniel's recovery took months, and during that time, Elena became a steady part of Marcus's life again. Slowly, cautiously, they rebuilt a friendship from the ruins of their marriage. They shared quiet dinners, long conversations, and painful truths they once avoided. Marcus admitted how deeply her departure had shattered his confidence. Elena admitted she had spent years terrified of being poor because she grew up watching her parents lose everything. Success had become her shield against fear, and eventually that fear poisoned the way she loved. For the first time, they truly understood each other, not as perfect people, but as flawed human beings carrying invisible wounds. Spring arrived slowly over the city. Cherry blossoms filled the parks, streets grew warmer, life moved forward. One evening, Marcus invited Elena to the rooftop of the old apartment building, where they once lived before wealth changed everything. The building looked smaller now, older, almost forgotten among giant modern towers. But the memories remained alive there. They stood together watching sunset colors spread across the skyline, while distant traffic hummed below like waves. Marcus confessed something he had never told anyone. The night Elena left, before the phone call about his fortune arrived, he had nearly given up on life entirely. Not because he lost money, but because losing her made him believe he would never be enough for anyone. Elena covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Marcus then explained that becoming rich the next morning had not healed that pain. In some ways, it made everything worse. Suddenly, everyone respected him, but he could never fully trust whether people loved him or his wealth. That loneliness followed him everywhere. Elena cried openly now, realizing the depth of damage caused by one decision made during frustration and fear. Then Marcus said something she would remember forever. He told her forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. Forgiveness is deciding someone's worst mistake should not define the rest of their life. The city lights flickered on around them one by one. And standing there above the streets where their love once nearly died, Marcus finally took Elena's trembling hand again. Not because the past disappeared, but because both of them had become stronger, wiser, and more honest through the pain. They did not rush into another marriage immediately. Real healing takes time. Instead, they rebuilt trust day by day through consistency, honesty, and patience. Together, they expanded community programs across the state, helping thousands of struggling families find housing, jobs, and education opportunities. People often asked Marcus why he chose to give Elena another chance after everything. His answer was always simple. Because sometimes people break under pressure, and sometimes they learn from the pieces afterward. Years later, Marcus and Elena returned quietly to the small bookstore cafe where they first met long before wealth entered their lives. The same smell of coffee floated through the air. Rain tapped softly against the windows exactly like that first evening years ago. Older now, calmer now, they sat together smiling gently at memories that once carried so much pain. Marcus no longer cared whether the world called him the richest man in the city, because real wealth was sitting across from him, not perfection, not status, not money. Just love that survived failure, pride, heartbreak, forgiveness, and time. Before the story ends, comment below. Do you believe people truly change after losing someone they love? And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who may need hope, healing, or a reminder that second chances can still exist in this world. In the end, the greatest miracle was never the billions Marcus received overnight. It was the fact that after betrayal, heartbreak, and unimaginable success, he still chose kindness over bitterness. And maybe that is the rarest kind of rich person the world will ever see.